Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we dig into a stack of sources and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're jumping into a world that, well, it can often feel a bit mystifying, maybe organizational politics. And our guide is, surprisingly, this little book written way back in 1908, but somehow it just cuts right through the noise, even today.
Yeah, we're talking about Microcosmographia Academica by F.M. Cornford. It's this brilliant satirical take on basically how things get done, or maybe more often how they don't get done at universities. And
Yeah.
the fact that it was like retypeset fairly recently in 2005, long after it hit public domain, that tells you something about how relevant it still feels.
Oh, absolutely. And Cornford, he doesn't pull any punches right from the start. In his opening advertisement, he basically tells most people, the young, the old, the ones who aren't ambitious, to just, toss the book. Or use it for kindling, I think he says. But then he gets super specific about who should read it. And this part is great. He says, if you are neither less than 25 years old nor more than 30, and if you are ambitious and your spirit hankers after academic politics, read, and may your soul, if you have a soul, find mercy. I mean, talk about setting a tone. It's like the secret password for a very select club.
Exactly. And he lays out this a pretty grim picture, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Calls it the painful path for this politician in training. You start out feeling, oppressed, but also kind of disagreeable, full of fire. But then, fast forward to 35, and suddenly you're the oppressor.
Yeah.
Just as disagreeable probably to the next generation. Then by 50, you're powerful. But now people are studying your quirks, trying to figure out how to square you, how to manage you to get things done. And all the while, you can hear those young men in a hurry, nipping at your heels, wanting your spot.
Wow, quite the career arc. So the message is loud and clear. This isn't for the faint of heart, but the really fascinating bit, the core idea, is right there in the warning. He says conviction, it's never yet been produced by an appeal to reason, because reason just makes people uncomfortable. Instead, if you actually want to persuade people, you have to aim for their prejudice and the political motive, not their logic.
Precisely. He sets up these two worlds. There's the silent, reasonable world, the world of ideas, maybe, that you're leaving. And then there's this other place, the world of unreason. That's the political arena, where different rules apply.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're going to pull out those nuggets of wisdom from Cornford's satire. Hopefully it'll help you, our listener, understand those unspoken rules of navigating complex organizations anywhere, really, especially when, logic just seems to hit a brick wall. Okay, so let's dive into this world of unreason. Cornford gives us a cast of characters, right? 5 main parties. And what's amazing is how recognizable they feel, even today. These aren't just dusty old archetypes.
No, they really aren't. First up, you've got the conservative liberals and the liberal conservatives. And these two, well, they sound different, but Cornford paints them as pretty similar. They're broad-minded, supposedly. But they're permanently stuck in what he calls the valley of indecision, always wanting something done, just never right now. They're often looking back to 1881-82 as his specific, slightly absurd date, meaning they're hung up on old battles, old ways of doing things. He says their minds are open to conviction, which sounds good, but so many convictions have already got inside that it's very difficult to find the openings.
Huh. So basically, too much mental clutter from the past to let anything new in. We've all met people like that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Then there's the non-placids. This one's simpler. He's not open to conviction, period. He's a man of principle. But Cornford defines principle here as just a rule of inaction. This guy's always on the safe side, which is geographically located on the northern side of the interior of the Senate House. A very Cambridge-specific joke. But the point is, this is the automatic no vote, the personification of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Even if it is broke, just pure inertia.
Right. The default is always no. Avoids risk, avoids effort.
Exactly. Next up, the Adulamites. And Cornford calls these ones dangerous. Why? Because they know what they want. Simple as that. And what they want is all the money there is going. Their motto is refreshingly direct. If you will scratch my back, I will scratch yours. And if you won't, I will scratch your face. And they get the money, he says, because they're not refined like classical men. They're pragmatists, maybe ruthless ones.
So these are the deal makers, the power brokers, less about ideology, more about tangible benefits for their group, like the department that always seems to snag the most funding.
That's a perfect modern analogy, yeah. They play the game to win resources. And finally, you have the young man in a hurry. He's described as a ridiculously youthful prig. Because he lacks experience, he actually thinks something might be done before very long. Imagine that. He's busy trying to organize societies for the purpose of making silk purses out of sow's ears. But Cornford adds that these efforts are usually harmless to the sows.
Meaning his idealistic projects don't actually change much?
Pretty much. He's got a conscience, definitely afflicted with a conscience,
Yeah.
but he hasn't learned to tie up his Cato, which is an old reference, meaning he hasn't learned when to keep his strong moral opinions to himself for political reasons. He's naive.
So, let's see. The perpetually indecisive, the automatic naysayers, the ruthless pragmatists, and the naive idealists. What a crew. And you're right, these types pop up everywhere, not just in old universities. It's about human dynamics in groups. Okay, so we have these different factions. How do they actually, get things done or stop things? Cornford talks about caucuses, secret meetings, basically.
Yeah, that's the idea. Political cliques. And he has that great description of a caucus. He says it's like a mousetrap. When you are outside, you want to get in. And when you are inside, the mere sight of the other mice makes you want to get out.
Ah, love that.
And they're usually baited with muffins and cigars. Or, the modern equivalent might be free coffee and donuts at a committee meeting. So the Adullamites, the money grabbers, they hold caucuses to conspire against the college system, wearing blue spectacles and false beards, apparently. Very cloak and dagger. But Cornford jokes you can scatter them just by suggesting longer working hours, so maybe not that dangerous. They have their weak spots.
Like comfort and routine.
Exactly. Then the liberal conservative and conservative liberal caucuses. He says they're basically identical, their biggest, boldest move, forming a syndicated committee to figure out how to prevent the public washing of linen.
Ah, the age-old goal of keeping internal squabbles private? Damage control.
Right. And what happens? This committee produces 3 minority reports of enormous bulk on some different subject, which all end up in the bin. And this, Cornford deadpans, is what's called reforming the university from within.
Oh, that's painfully familiar. Committees formed to look like action is being taken, but really just delaying or burying the issue. I feel like I sat through a few of those.
Haven't we all? And when it comes to elections, these mainstream caucuses pick candidates specifically because the non-placets might mistake them for the other party. The goal is just to maintain the balance of power, keep things stable, and make sure those pesky young men in a hurry are kept out.
So it's all about preserving the status quo.
Precisely. And the young men in a hurry, they don't have a proper caucus. They just meet by 2s and 3s in desolate places and gnash their teeth. Poor guys, out in the cold.
Fascinating picture of how the insiders operate versus the outsiders. Okay, so if you're navigating the system, how do you actually gain influence? It clearly isn't just about being brilliant or working hard.
No, not according to Cornford. He gives 2 main routes. The first one is, passive. Gain influence in exactly the same way as the gout. Sit tight and drink port wine.
Seriously, just wait it out.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
If you stick around long enough, attend the right dinners, become a familiar face, you eventually get known as a good fellow. People forgive your past mistakes, your wild oats, and you just sort of accumulate influence through sheer presence and sociability.
The power of just showing up and being agreeable, I guess.
Right. The second path is to become a good businessman.
Yeah.
This person, Cornford says slyly, their mind has not been warped and narrowed by merely intellectual interests. A little dig at the academics there.
Haha, yeah.
And they don't have those odious pushing qualities. They keep a finger on the pulse of the great world, the real world outside academia. But it's a world you have to keep in touch with carefully. It must not be allowed on any account to touch you. Maintain a certain distance. And how do you do this? You send promising young men off to become lawyers, funded by fellowships with £200 a year and no duties. The idea is only the practical, good businessmen types will bother to come back.
So this is about leveraging external connections and a sort of pragmatic, non-academic mindset.
Exactly. It's influence through worldliness and practicality, not necessarily scholarship.
It's really striking how both methods basically sidestep traditional ideas of merit. It's about playing the social game or having the right kind of practical connections. Okay, we've met the players, we've seen how influence works, or how you get it anyway. Now, what about the actual principles that govern this whole system? Cornford lays out some underlying rules, doesn't he?
He does. And they're quite revealing. The first principle for a group dedicated to learning, it should be freedom from the burden of political cares.
Makes sense. How do they achieve that?
By giving ultimate authority, the sovereign authority, to the non-placets. The Senate, he calls them. Why? Because they have a high average age. They're scattered all over the country in country parsonages, so they have no corporate feeling. They're necessarily ignorant of the details of most issues, and therefore they feel no sense of any responsibility Unless, he jokes, the church is in danger.
So you give power to the people least likely to use it, or use it effectively. That certainly frees up the people on the ground.
Precisely. It ensures inertia at the top. For smaller groups, like boards, responsibility is diffused. You have to consult with at least 20 other people who are accustomed to regard him with well-founded suspicion. This avoids anyone having too much individual power or facing the degradations of party compromise. Then there's also a council made up of business-like men, including some of those good businessmen.
So governance is basically designed to dilute responsibility and encourage inaction. A brilliant, cynical system for maintaining stability.
You could say that. Then there's the principle of discipline, which includes religion. The idea here is simple. There must be some rules. But the real purpose of these rules isn't really moral guidance. It's to relieve the younger men of the burdensome feeling of moral or religious obligation. Why? So their energies are to be left unimpaired for the pursuit of athletics.
Athletics? Seriously?
Seriously. The rules are there to stop young people from taking learning or religion too seriously, because that's considered bad form. The best rules, he says, are the ones that forbid perfectly harmless but noticeable things like smoking in college courts or walking to Mattingly on Sunday without academical dress. Mattingly's a nearby village. These trivial rules help to obscure the more serious ethical questions and just generally relieve the mind of all sense of obligation towards society.
Wow. So enforce petty regulations to distract from or trivialize the bigger stuff. Keep everyone focused on superficiality so they don't question the fundamentals.
Exactly. It keeps things manageable. And finally, there's the principle of sound learning. This one dictates that the noise of vulgar fame should never trouble the cloistered calm of academic existence. Basically, learning is only considered sound if nobody outside of the university has ever heard of it.
That sounds deliberately obscure.
Oh, it is. A sound scholar is someone with no reputation outside the university and rather queer one inside it. If you write a book, Cornford advises, it had better not be readable. If it is, you'll be called brilliant and you'll forfeit all respect among the truly sound scholars. University presses, he claims, are subsidized specifically for the purpose of producing books which no one can read.
Ouch.
And lectures. Avoid eloquence at all costs. That's reserved for the public orator who's expected to be formal and probably dull.
So sound learning means being incomprehensible and unknown to the wider world. That's quite a principle.
It really emphasizes that insularity, doesn't it?
It does. So looking at these principles together, governance by inertia, discipline through triviality, learning through obscurity, what values are actually being promoted here, it seems like comfort, tradition, avoiding conflict, keeping things contained.
Yeah, while things like innovation, public engagement, maybe even passionate intellectual debate are actively discouraged or at least subtly undermined.
Okay, so after laying all this out, Cornford gets to what he calls the central mystery of it all. And it's not what you might expect, like corruption or something.
No, exactly. He says it's quite a mistake to think that real dishonesty is at all common. People aren't usually acting in bad faith. The real political motive, he argues, is actually honest. It's fear. Just genuine, perpetual, heartfelt timorousness.
Fear, that's the main driver.
That's what he claims. He even points to everyday language, like how people say, I'm afraid I don't, when they just mean, I think I don't. He sees it as a symptom of this underlying timidity, and then he lists the main objects of this fear. He calls them bugbears. In order, they are giving yourself away, meaning showing vulnerability or making a mistake. Then females. Remember, this was 1908 Cambridge.
Right, different times.
Then what doctor will say, so fear of superior's judgment. Then the public washing of linen, keeping scandals quiet, followed by socialism, otherwise atheism, fear of radical ideas. Then the great world, the scary outside. And finally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That list is amazing. Some are dated, obviously, but others. Fear of vulnerability, fear of judgment, fear of public exposure, fear of the unknown outside world. Those are pretty timeless human anxieties, aren't they?
Absolutely. And Cornford says that almost all the practical political principles and tactics you see can be traced back to these fundamental fears.
That makes a lot of sense. It provides the why behind all the maneuvering and especially the inaction we're about to discuss. People aren't necessarily lazy or obstructive for no reason. They're often acting out of fear. Okay, so if fear is the main motivator, how does this actually play out in practice? How do these academics, politicians conduct business? Or maybe more accurately, how do they prevent business from being conducted?
Well, Cornford starts by saying, there's only one argument for doing something. The rest are arguments for doing nothing.
Only one reason to act.
Yeah. The argument for action is simply that it is the right thing to do. But, he notes, being certain about what's right is rare, and the academic mind, he suggests, prefers suspense of judgment, because logically, inaction can have no consequences at all, which he admits is a mere theorist's paradox, because, of course, inaction does have consequences.
But it feels safer, right? Doing nothing feels less risky than doing something that might go wrong.
Exactly, that's the bureaucratic instinct. So he details two key arguments for inaction, both designed to appeal directly to that political motive, to fear. First is the principle of the wedge. This means you should not act justly now for fear of raising expectations that you may act still more justly in the future.
Wow. So don't do the right thing now because it might commit you to doing more right things later and you might not have the nerve.
Precisely. It admits the current action is just, but uses fear of the future to block it. The second is the principle of the dangerous precedent. This one argues, you should not now do an admittedly right action for fear you, or your equally timid successors, should not have the courage to do right in some future case, which is essentially different but superficially resembles the present one. The logical conclusion, nothing should ever be done for the first time.
The wedge and the dangerous precedent, once you hear those names, you start seeing them everywhere, don't you? They're the standard playbook for resisting change in any organization. We can't do this because it's a slippery slope, or this sets a bad precedent.
Absolutely. They're incredibly common justifications for maintaining the status quo, often disguised as wisdom or prudence. Cornford lists a few others, too.
Yeah.
Like simply saying, a change is a change, implying all change is inherently bad. Or the fair trial argument, which often just means, look, I don't want to change my routine, and if we do this, you'll have to change yours. It's self-interest masked as caution. And of course, the classic, the time is not ripe. And the reason the time isn't ripe usually boils down to that bugbear, what doctor will say, fear of disapproval.
It's always someone else's fault the time isn't right.
Always. So beyond just arguing against action, there's the actual conduct of business, which Cornford says mostly means obstruction. He divides the methods. Conservative liberal obstruction is apparently much the more effective. How do they do it? They might claim the current proposal would block the way for a far more sweeping reform, usually referencing some ancient impractical plan from 1881, just to derail the present idea.
So skill of the good in the name of some mythical, unattainable perfect.
Right. Or they'll argue that the machinery for affecting the proposed objects already exists, even if that machinery is, rusted solid and hasn't been used in decades. Often combined with the principle of washing linen, arguing it's better not to act if acting means revealing some internal issue publicly. Avoid transparency. And a favorite tactic is the alternative proposal. This is the classic red herring. You introduce one or two competing proposals, often deliberately flawed, so that suddenly 3 or more alternatives are in the field. Then it's easy to get a majority against any single one of them. And guess what? Nothing will be done.
Paralysis by analysis, engineered on purpose. That's devious.
It is. There's also the method of prevarication, where you argue weakly against the side you actually favor.
Why would you do that?
Because, Cornford suggests in Academia, a few bad reasons for doing something neutralize all the good reasons for doing it. So you subtly sabotage a good idea by attaching bad arguments to it.
Wow. Okay, what about the other side? Liberal conservative obstruction.
Their methods are less subtle, more invective. They use the last-ditch argument, threatening to resign or fight to the death, metaphorically speaking. Usually from the safe side, of course. And they like to label new ideas with the wildcat epithet, calling them reckless or unproven. Cornford notes this wasn't even a common phrase in 1881, highlighting how absurd these labels can be.
So more drama and name-calling from that side.
Seems so. And if all that fails, then you resort to pure wasting time. One method is boring, you just talk very slowly, very indistinctly, slightly off topic, until everyone else just gives up out of sheer exhaustion and frustration.
Filibuster by boredom.
Pretty much. Or you can use questions of procedure, bring up obscure rules from debating club days to argue endlessly about whether an amendment can be amended.
Wow.
Pure procedural obstruction.
Anything to avoid discussing the actual substance?
Exactly. Other minor tactics include appealing to college feeling, stirring up institutional loyalty or rivalry, or even creating distractions with winter sports like bear baiting or bullfighting, basically, provoking arguments or controversies unrelated to the main issue. Or comma hunting, getting bogged down in tiny details of wording to avoid the big picture, though he warns that can be dangerously distracting for everyone.
Good grief. It's like a comprehensive manual on how to ensure absolutely nothing ever changes. But wait, Cornford does offer one way for things to actually happen, right? something called squaring.
He does, finally, a way to get things done, squaring. And it's closely connected with jobs. He hilariously defines my jobs as public-spirited proposals that just happen to benefit me or my friends. But your jobs, those are insidious intrigues for the advancement of yourself and your friends.
The classic double standard.
Isn't it just? So the process of going on the square is almost ceremonial. You have to walk up and down the King's Parade, a main street in Cambridge, specifically between Pembroke and Caius colleges, between 2 and 4 p.m. This is the time and place for informal, off-the-record deals.
Like the proverbial smoke-filled room, but outdoors and involving a stroll?
Kinda, yeah. You have an accidental meeting, you chat about nothing important for 10 minutes, then just as you're parting, one person calls the other back. And you vaguely hint at the favor you need, phrasing it as, oh, by the way, if you should happen. You treat it like it's no big deal, very casual, very secret. The other person understands, and later, they'll do the same for their job. The key, Cornford stresses, is the absence of connection between the two favors. It's never explicitly quid pro quo. It's an unspoken understanding.
A gentleman's agreement built on mutual back-scratching.
Exactly. And Cornford concludes, quite bluntly, that the men who get things done are the men who walk up and down King's Parade from 2 to 4 every day of their lives. This, he says, is the real choice of Hercules in politics. You either join the squarers, learn the game, and become effective, or you stay with the obstructionists and resign yourself to the fact that most things you care about probably won't happen. You choose the world of unreason, or you fight it futilely.
That really sums up the whole world of unreason, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's driven by fear, navigated by obstruction, and the only way forward is through these subtle, informal deals based on mutual interest, not necessarily merit or logic. Hashtag, tag, outro. Well, that was quite a journey through F.M. Cornford's Microcosmographia, Academica. A deep dive into the often bewildering, sometimes infuriating world of academic politics. We've looked at his cast of characters, the non-placids, the Adullamites, the young men in a hurry. We've seen how influence is gained often just by sticking around or being a good businessman. We explored those unwritten rules of governance, discipline, and learning that seem designed to uphold tradition and, frankly, inertia. And we saw how fear, that heartfelt timorousness, is the hidden engine driving so much of it, leading to all those ingenious arguments and tactics for inaction, like the wedge and the dangerous precedent, until finally the only way to actually achieve anything seems to be through that subtle art of squaring on King's Parade.
And what's just incredible, really, is how much of this century-old satire still rings true. You take it out of the specific Cambridge setting, and it becomes this universal guide to human behavior inside any large organization, any bureaucracy. It really forces you to question that assumption that decisions are always made rationally. Cornford shows us just how powerful prejudice, habit, and especially fear can be.
So what's the takeaway for you listening to this? Cornford's final message, his farewell, is actually quite touching, but also practical. He basically says if you get to middle age and realize his warnings about that painful path were right, if you've played the game and maybe become a bit cynical, he advises you to remember that other world within the microcosm, the silent, reasonable world where the only action is thought, and thought is free from fear.
It leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? Knowing all this, seeing how the world of unreason operates, how do you choose to navigate your own career, your own organization? Do you dive in, learn the rules of squaring, master the arguments against inaction, and try to wield power within that system? Or do you try to step back, find your way back to that silent, reasonable world, maybe carrying, as he puts it, just enough bitterness to put a pleasant edge on your conversation and just enough worldly wisdom to save other people's toes?
It's a fundamental choice, maybe. How do you stay effective, stay relevant, without, as Cornford fears, your brain should ever get woolly or anyone should wish you out of the way? Something to think about.